recording.
It's
Valleys
not,
people, episode 24.
so a radio
30
consultant
minutes.
does not
Recorded 6 through 12:31. Replay date to be advised.
Hello, welcome again to the Valleys people. Today in the show we're going to meet another world champion, this time from the Central Coast. In fact, 2GO's Central Coast Sportsman of the Year, and also an architect who can boast 3 generations of the same name working on buildings within the Hunter Valley, and no one else can do that anywhere in Australia. Hope you can stay and hope you can meet these people. Thanks for being with us today. I think in this series I've reasonably lost count of the number of world champions we've been able to introduce. And that's not to downgrade any of them, because they've certainly earned their titles. It is a reminder to us all, I think, that right here amongst us we have sportsmen and people of status that we should be very proud of. And one of those is with us now, Brett Dryland, who's the Central Coast 2GO Sportsman of the Year in some very fierce competition there. 20-odd or more people, weren't there, in the series?
There's some very hot people there. Done remarkable things.
And so have you, world title Hobie craft champion. And that's something that's fairly recent, isn't it? The design of that sailing boat?
Yeah, the development of catamarans itself is fairly recent. Catamarans, I guess, was started by Polynesians. That initiated the design of catamarans.
Without rigger canoes, really?
Yeah. They did remarkable things on that, travelling something like 1,500 miles with a sail, and if there wasn't any wind, they'd just break out the paddle and paddle away. But just recently, about the last 10 years, small design catamarans have really taken off.
Yes, yes. So it really is recent, isn't it, when you think of it? But as you've just described it, it's a long-term sailing situation.
It sure has been. Catamarans itself, the small catamarans, there's so many designs around now. It's incredible, all stemming back from very early on.
I think what makes your world title all the more incredible, Brett, is the fact that you had to go overseas to earn it, to the Virgin Islands, and we always hear about different sailing conditions and different understandings of wind and current and land terrain. Are these real problems for somebody who's used to sailing around the coast of New South Wales?
Yeah. In every world titles, there are the combinations of wind, sea and tide and local knowledge, which play a very important part in a series such as a world titles, because anything that differentiates one skipper from another is just enough to win a world titles. The level of ability in a world titles is so good that any small differentiation is quite good if you can get it.
Yes. And were you able to learn this quickly and adapt to the Virgin Islands?
Well, the Virgin Islands itself, well, it's right on the tropics there. There was quite a large swell and chop, which I get plenty of practice sailing at Terrigal. We're used to that exact same conditions. You have to learn about tides and basically wind patterns very slightly. They don't have the same as we have the basic nor'easters during the summer. They get the trade winds. So there's a basic knowledge to be grasped there.
Yes. Not content with trying for a world title, you also went in there 1,000-mile, was it a coastal races? Did you do that before the titles or after the titles?
No, that was about 4 months after the titles. We had an invitation from Mr. Worrell, who actually runs the race. It's a 1,000 nautical mile race up the west coast of America, stretching from Fort Lauderdale in Miami, stretching right through about 5 states up to Virginia Beach.
And had you ever been down that road before?
No, it's the first time we've even seen the coast. But we had maps, etc., which we could study over here. But it's really not quite the same studying maps as actually being there.
So without a coastline that you'd been on before, just with a few maps, you set off for a 1,000-mile race?
Yeah, we had a lot of help from the rest of the people in the race that had sailed it before. We were there for about 2 weeks before we actually had to make the race, in which we had to prepare our boat. There's a lot of work in actually just getting the boat right, because as you might gather, sailing 1,000 miles in a Hobie cat, which is fairly small, 16 foot long, you have to do certain variations to the boat in order to strengthen it to make sure nothing goes wrong, as well as understanding local wind conditions and tides, and basically just planning.
What I should have said at the introduction of that, I'm sorry, Brett, was the fact that not only did you have the maps and you'd never been down the road before, but you also end up winning the race.
Yeah, we were lucky enough to win. Everything seemed to fall into place for us. At least it fell into place towards the end of the race, which is the right time for it to fall into place. In the beginning of the race, I guess we were just trying to learn. We didn't really have any idea of coastal navigation, especially over in the States, because it's totally different to what it is over here. Over here we have lighthouses, which are the big thing here on every point, which give a certain reading,
Yes.
flashes a second. But over there they don't have many lighthouses at all. The coast, or the 1,000 miles we race along, is fairly unique in that it's mostly beach and it's low terrain, so there's no need for lighthouses for them.
But it all looks the same, I guess, from the sea if you're travelling the
It looks
distance.
remarkably the same. It's incredible. You really don't know where you are.
Well, how did you go this crash map reading course then?
We were still, the night before we had to race, we were still asking the organiser of the race what all these symbols on the map meant.
This is more incredible, there's more questions I ask.
Yeah, we were so naive when we did the race, which really added to our side of the race. It was an incredible event because we learnt so much, and yet we still did fairly well.
Come on, you didn't do very well. You won it against
Yeah.
people who'd been up and down that coast, I guess, many times.
Yeah.
How did you find out where you were?
Well, we had to either try and actually find a lighthouse, which weren't there were very few of them around.
First find the lighthouse.
Yeah, but sometimes we did some really crazy things. Some of the reports that came through the paper, we sort of got labelled as the crazy Aussies. We used to come into the beach at any time to find out where we were, and you'd either have to try and find someone walking along the beach, or try and knock on a few houses to see if someone was home to tell you in fact where you were.
But this is a 24-hour race, night and day, isn't it? You can't go knocking on people's door at 3 o'clock in the morning. Huh?
Well, we didn't really consider it like that. It's a race. Well, we consider it a race.
Any
and
prize victory?
That's it. Yeah, we just you sort of think, oh, there's a boat behind me. I'm going to try and find out where you are. So you just sort of run round like a mad chook, trying to find out where you are.
Well, how did you find out where you were?
Well, we had several pretty interesting events. One on the first leg, there's along this 1,000 miles you have to check into 8 checkpoints along the way that are predetermined, in which you have to check into. There's a set of flags on the beach and you pull your boat up through the flags. It's more of a safety device to make sure everyone's still okay and make the checkpoints. But going along to the first checkpoint, we thought we'd gone past it and we'd have to sail back to it. So we came into the beach there and we saw about a group of about a dozen houses. It looked a bit like an army barracks type thing. And we pulled the boat up on the beach and then started running up the beach. And it must have been sort of some sight, because we're all in our wet weather gear and red eyes and all dripping wet. and trying to knock on these front doors, trying to wake someone up. And it was about 3 in the morning, so everyone's sound asleep. And we knocked on about 9 doors and no one would answer. And we came up to this one house, had a big veranda on the front, and there was a divider separating the veranda from the steps. And I was just about ready to step over this divider, and this big Alsatian was looking up at me, and I thought, I don't think I'll go over there. So I didn't know what I would do. I was sort of knocking on the window vane trying to wake someone up, but no one would get up. So I thought of this brilliant idea. I'd make the dog really mad, get it barking and carrying on. And so we got a few sticks and we're prodding it and poking it. Finally got it really upset and it started snarling.
I don't believe this. I wonder why the American press called you the Crazy Aussies. I can't think of why.
It was a really good event. We hope to go back there again next year, try and compete in it.
Yes, it wouldn't do if you'd just gone to sleep reading H.G. Wells, would you? Banging on the window at 3 o'clock in wet weather gear.
No.
That's quite an experience, though, isn't it? I mean, to get into a race like that and end up winning it.
Yes, well, that added a lot to it. But we were very lucky. Towards the end of the race, a lot of the other competitors had very bad luck in breaking gear. And we actually got the stronger wind conditions towards the end, which suit Australians. So everything just seemed to fall in place from there on in.
Yes, they may not have been the outstanding map readers that you were, or that was probably one of the points. Brett, the world title that you won in the 16-foot Hobie, that's a seasonal point score, is it? You have to do that over many races?
Oh no, it is a flat 10 races over in the what was in the Virgin Islands that year. They have built about 55 boats, especially for the world champion.
Yeah, so you don't take your boat with you?
No, they supply the boats. It's designed as a one-class racing boat, designed to test the skipper rather than the boat. And they actually manufacture the boats and take them to the world titles. And then you have a series of people that come over from each of the countries throughout the world, qualifying through, say, their nationals or state titles or whatever they have. And they all go head over to the world titles. And you have a series of about 10 races during the Worlds, in which there's a round-robin series. There's about 120 competitors with about 40 boats. So everyone gets allocated a boat per race. You swap your boat after every race. And everyone gets to sail 10 races. And then there's a cut-off in which the top 40 skippers are selected out of the 120 just by adding up all the points, with the lowest points winning. And then those top 40 skippers sail for another 3 races.
Yes. It really doesn't matter what sport you're in. You can't get much higher than being a world champion, can you? I mean, how does it feel being an accountant from Holgate, being world title holder?
It is an incredible feeling. You don't really doesn't really hit you probably until when you actually get home, and you're able to your friends come up to you and say, geez, that's great.
And so
but,
it is.
Once you've sort of done it, you're looking again to try and do it again. It's great.
Yes, you've got to beat your own standards all the time then, haven't you?
Yeah, it's sort of a personal ambition.
Yes. Well, Brett, our congratulations to you, as we would say to any world champion, and the world title holder of the 16-foot Hobie craft, and also winner of the Worrell 1000. Perhaps we should write to all those people that you banged on windows and doors to tell you which way to go, and sort of say, well, the Crazy Aussies may be back for another hit at that. But meanwhile, Brett, congratulations on all that, and also being the 1981 Central Coast Sportsman of the Year. And that wasn't easy in 1981 to win, I happen to know.
Thanks
So thank you very much, and thanks for being with us today. I'll be back in just a moment with our next guest in the Valley's People. Welcome back to the show. I don't suppose that if you were an architect you could really be working on a hall for plans that your father designed the rectory for, that your grandfather designed the church for. I don't think you could do that anywhere else in Australia, except through Ian Pender. It's the longest architectural name in Australia, the Penders. Ian, welcome to the Valley's people.
Thank you.
Did you actually do that? Did you design the hall?
Yes, I designed the church hall after grandfather designed the church and dad the rectory, and then I put additions onto the church as well.
Yes, yes, and that would be exclusive, wouldn't it, to the Penders?
Oh, it's fairly unique, yes.
Yeah, something for family historians to trace
Yes.
back. And then the family historians would have a field day, wouldn't they, in trying to trace the Penders coming to Maitland?
Well, it went back to 1838 when John Pender brought his family out to Australia on a migrant ship from Scotland. And then he was a builder and set up his building firm in Maitland. And then in 1855, his elder brother came out to join him with his family. And in that family there was John Pender, my grandfather. But he left the ship at Melbourne and went on to the goldfields, while the rest of the family came through to Maitland.
Yeah, sailors and all did that, didn't they?
Yes, everybody went.
They jumped ship for the goldfields.
And he spent about 3 years on the goldfields before he came back to Maitland. And there he joined his uncle in the building firm. That family story has it there was a big argument with uncle, and grandfather, who'd been trained as an architect before he came out, set up on his own as an architect. And that was about 1863, and then the firm has carried on with minor interruptions ever since then.
I wonder how old he would have been then, Ian, your grandfather John. At a very early age he was architect?
He was about 26, 27
Really?
at that stage, yes.
Yes. And at that stage, if you're looking back, what did you say, 1860s? The 1860s?
1860s he started.
Was there very much work for him to start a practice such as that?
Oh, there was a lot of work in the whole of the Hunter, and the New England was developing in those days. And between the 1860s and the 1890s, and a bit later, grandfather designed numerous churches from Maitland through to Moree, Armidale, Muswellbrook, Scone, hospitals and convents, and a lot of public buildings, as well as homesteads, because that was the time when they were developing the big homesteads on the properties around the area.
Think about your grandfather when you think of an architect in a modern context. Grandfather was really architect, interior designer and consultant all in one, wasn't he?
Yes, he was. The architects in those days had a lot more to do with the control of the building in person. They'd produce some pretty drawings, and then the various people would put those drawings into effect, much in their own way under the guidance of the architect. But these days, the architect would produce a sheath of drawings to get the same effect that people of grandfather's day got with one or two, or a little sketch on the back of a pad or something like that.
But your grandfather was involved, like architects today, in designing fireplaces and all the sort of ornate fittings within the house.
Oh yes, everything was designed, and there are sketches of these things.
And no one else but Ian Pender could go to a filing cabinet and find his grandfather's working drawings.
Well, it'd be very hard. A lot of them are lost over the years. But,
yes, some you've brought today, Ian, and they're so fascinating just to look at and scan across, and I'm sure each one of them has got a story. But we've just selected a few, and perhaps if you wouldn't mind, you could take us through. Now, the first thing we have to establish, we're really talking about the period from what, shall we say, 1870s through to the late 1800s, are we?
Or up to about 1905.
Okay. So the first one is, in fact, the Benevolent Asylum, isn't it, in West Maitland?
Well, it was started as Benevolent Asylum. It's known as Ben Home now, and this was a building that was now a home for the aged. Now that is grandfather's building. Quite recently I've designed and we've had built a set of units for old people on the side as well. Now, people that know Ben Home will realise that this isn't quite the way it looks now, because everything to the right of that centre door was not built. They ran out of money when they got halfway through, so that...
So we're looking at the master plan.
We're looking at what it was supposed to be, but...
One of the other interesting things while you talk about Maitland was, in fact, the design work that went into it would be the very first grandstand, would it, at the Maitland Showground that your grandfather was involved in?
Well, this was one of the very early ones, yes. And this was the design for that stand, I understand, was more or less where I think it was the Albion Cricket Ground was, which is where the sideshow area of Maitland Showground is now. And that, I understand that one was burnt down a few years after it was built.
Well, he had a flair for lavishness, didn't he? He wasn't going to spare anything for posterity.
No, even the minor buildings have a certain flair and technique about them.
And he wasn't confined to Maitland because you just mentioned earlier there that he'd designed some churches, and I think probably the one in Tamworth, which is still standing, is something we can all see as we drive through.
Yes. Well, that's an interesting one because it's almost Moorish in its outlook. He got away from the Gothic and the classical, and if you look at the plan in the bottom left-hand corner there, you'll notice that the pulpit is in the corner. It's a square church, actually it's a cube, and the pulpit is in the corner and the seats are on the diagonal. Some very modern churches do that these days, but in those days that was quite an innovation.
Yes, indeed. He seems to have been an innovator. What I liked as I looked through those drawings was, in fact, the sort of personification of that expression on the hustings. Your grandfather, in fact, designed them, the old electoral platforms and things.
That's right. This is a picture of the hustings designed for Maitland. Now, the idea of this was downstairs, as you can see on the plan, there were 4 rooms, and they were the polling booths, and the chaps sat at the desk and took their names, and you went into the little cubicles there to vote. But upstairs on the balcony, this is where the candidates, they stood up there and they harangued the public and asked them to go in and vote and encouraged them, and then people went in and voted and then went on their way. There was no compulsory voting in those days. But,
and there was no electronic electoral blackout either, if you were just standing there cajoling the voters as they went in.
That's right, up to the last minute, yes.
Yes. I think perhaps, as you mentioned, the homesteads of the Hunter Valley, a lot of work of your grandfather John went into that. I have this one here that it's very intriguing, Ian.
Yes, well, this was Leholme. It was out Patterson away from Maitland. It no longer exists, but it was one of the big homesteads of the Maitland area, and it is typical of many that he designed. Sintra in Maitland itself, which is alongside the benevolent home, is another big one. Annambar and of course a lot up the valley itself. This was the time when all the big properties were building their homesteads.
Yes, and in the obituary of the Newcastle Morning Herald of the day to your grandfather, it stated his piece de resistance was Beltrees. Some earlier while in the program we had Judy White down from Beltrees at Scone, and she told us a lot about the actual running of the property and then the generations of Whites, 150 years in the Hunter Valley, and it must be very gratifying to you to be able to know and go to the actual working drawings of the building.
Yes, well, grandfather did a lot of work for the White family, not only Beltrees itself, but many of the other properties that they owned, and this is the picture there is the picture of the working drawings for Beltrees itself. This was about the 7th or 8th design that he did for Mr. White on this, because apparently he was a very hard taskmaster as far as exactly what he wanted, and this was finally the plans from which the building was finally erected.
It'd be interesting to contrast those drawings with the Beltrees as it now is, as we saw through Judy White's book when she was here. There's a great similarity of detail to the final architectural plans.
Yes, well, we were up there quite recently, and going through the building after studying grandfather's plans, there's a lot of detail in that place in the way of fireplaces and staircase and that sort of thing that was repeated not only by grandfather, because it was perhaps one of the last buildings he designed, but by my father afterwards in what's known now as the Federation period of, or more or less what they call gentlemen's villas that were built round Maitland, and I was sort of fascinated to see the little bits of detail in the shape of a bracket or something like that is at Beltrees, which started to recur through a lot of the dad's designs, particularly in the following 10 or 15 years.
Did it occur to you back in the Second World War days, Ian, that a line of Penders such as John and your father Walter, and then it was your own interest, but when you enlisted for bomber squadrons and bomber command over Europe and such a limited tour of duty, did it strike you that maybe the family generation of architects would cease?
Oh, I don't
Just a youthful boy, were you?
I don't think you thought about those things. You were 18, you joined up, and the Air Force was one that I wanted to be in, and being an architectural student, they said, all right, well, you must be good on the drawing board, so I had no chance to be a pilot, they just drew a navigator, so I went from one drawing board to another. And And it was just the way the luck of the game goes that I ended up on bomber squadrons and, in Europe rather than anywhere else, which I'm grateful to the Air Force because they had a world tour at their expense in Canada and England.
Yes, but in all seriousness, you completed a tour of Bomber Command over Europe, and not all that many did.
No, it was at a time where the chances of coming through were about 1 in 3. But,
well, we're glad it happened that way anyway, Ian, because
yes,
you're able to continue. I guess you would be. You're able to continue the work of the Penders. Although I guess in all the generations, there's distinction, is there, in sort of architectural concepts? Yourself from your father, and your father from your grandfather?
Well, the changing technology, the change in architecture, the period when Ned was working, well, that encompassed a depression and 2 world wars where there wasn't a great deal of doing in the architectural scene, particularly in the country. And then, of course, after I came back after the Second World War, well, things were changing completely, and a different technology. The architect now doesn't do as much in the way of actually himself on the building that the former architects did, because he has to rely on structural engineers, mechanical engineers, and all these people. There's no chance these days for an architect to know everything about every building. So
yes.
He has to coordinate the people with the various skills that he needs to employ.
It's a fascinating thought that I have. I'm not quite sure whether it's crossed your mind before, but it seems to me, and I speak rather naively as a non-architect, of course, it seems to me that if we were to cast our minds forward, shall we say 100 years or so from now, it could be that the people of that generation are in fact going to be more interested in your grandfather's design of architecture than yours or your father's. Do you see the architects of the past making a greater contribution to society and our heritage?
Well, I think all architectural systems and feeling has to go back to history, and you see the developing of history, and the development of architecture in the Gothic and Renaissance days was very slow. Now it's so fast that and buildings are being put up and pulled down with great precision.
Yes.
So that I think that as far as that's concerned, that there will be buildings of this era that will be, well, the Opera House, of course,
yes.
And others that will stand the test of time. There'll be others that they'll say, well, no, that was a horrible year for architecture, you know, like a wine taster who said that, well, that wasn't a very good vintage that year.
Well, it's probably a horrible, yes.
Certain decades of architecture will be much the same way.
May well have been a horrible day for the Hunter Valley that the council has pulled all the veranda posts down too, but I suppose that's another argument altogether.
Yes, well, that view again.
But Ian Pender, thank you very much for being with us today, and it's really a fascinating thing to look back through the line of Penders and to go back to architectural monuments which are standing as I guess the living monument for your grandfather and father, and hopefully for you in the years to come. Ian Pender, thank you very much for being with us today on the Valley's People, and I'll be back in just a moment. Well, I trust you've enjoyed our guest today. First, the world champion, 16-foot Hobie craft winner, Brett Dryland, who earned that title for Australia in the Virgin Islands, and also won the 1,000 nautical mile race whilst he was there at the same time. And 3 generations of architectural firms within the Hunter Valley in the same surname, Pender, and there well could be a 4th. Ian Pender, our special guest today. Hope you've enjoyed our program, and I hope too that you'll be with us again when we meet 2 more of the Valley's People. Goodbye for now.